So, hi, Steph. Thanks ever so much for joining me this morning. I'm really excited to discuss your project. You and your lifelong friend, Mitch, began the Corner Club, a charity last year, and it offers free boxing training and psychotherapy, doesn't it, to boys and men? And you operate in schools and community centres across London. Now, I've watched a couple of your videos, and I have to say they're very moving.
Mm.
And to hear from your participants what they get out of these experiences is just fantastic.
Mm.
Um, we'll talk a bit more about that in a minute, I'm sure. So
Yeah.
you're a psychotherapist and a teacher, so you've got lots of experience of working with young people. And
Mm.
Mitch is an experienced boxing trainer, isn't he? So he's got lots of experience too of working with young people and men. Um, and as you know, I've got a very high regard for men and boys. I think they experience many unrecognized and unaddressed
Yeah.
disadvantages. Um, and I see our culture as having put a lot of money into women and girls' issues, not
Mm.
so much when it comes to boys and men. They're really
Mm.
seriously lagging behind,
Yeah.
particularly if you look at the suicide rates. And I know some of your participants mentioned suicide. I can't help but think if the suicide statistics were the other way around, three women to every man, that
Mm.
would be a
Mm.
national scandal. Everybody would be up
Yeah.
in arms and we get to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
Um, so I know it's hard raising funds for the Corner Club, which is one of the reasons why we're having our conversation today. You currently have a crowdfunder, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But just for now, would you tell me a little bit about yourself, how you got the idea for Corner Club? Um, Boxing training and psychotherapy don't go easily together in some people's minds. So, yeah, please tell us all about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on and talking to you today. I really appreciate it. And appreciate all the support that I know that you give to similar projects and incentives and the kind of underpinning us philosophies, theories, beliefs, and behind the work we do. Really. I think it's really important as well. Of course, it's really important to have champions that are men and women, but I think there is something that can land a little bit differently sometimes when women can promote and champion this kind of work and realize that that in no way negates or compromises support for women's initiatives as well.
Yeah.
So Corner Club. Wow. Yeah. So as you mentioned already, I was a teacher for 12 years in the London secondary schools in the same areas I grew up in, really. I was much more drawn to the pastoral side of the job. Did some work as a head of year and kind of looking after a whole year group cohort and their kind of well-being needs, essentially. I then went and studied for a master's in group and individual psychotherapy at the Gestalt Centre in London, which is a whole nother story which we won't go into today. I obtained my master's about 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Elected not to pursue the UKCP route, uh, partly due to my own feelings around them as a governing body and organisation, and some things that I feel quite uncomfortable about
Mhm.
in terms of how they can, conduct themselves, in my opinion. So, affiliated with another awarding body now, but I suppose the long and short of it really is that I had started working therapeutically with children in the third sector about 6 or 7 years ago. And I would often be given boys in particular, teenage boys who were struggling to stay in school, to access the curriculum, to regulate their emotions, to not constantly get thrown out of lessons, be temporarily moved to people referral units, often excluded permanently. And I won't, I'm sure you're aware of the kind of uh, crew to prison pipeline kind of idea that so often those boys are just forgotten, really, and end up in gangs, in prison, unemployed, addicts. Not to mention the suicide rates you spoke about before. But what I was finding, Sue, was that when I would take these boys to uh, a kind of therapy room, a typical therapy room, and try to do this work with them, I could build a really good rapport with them. But no matter how strong the relationship was that we built, there was such resistance in them to really kind of go into their own personal stuff, to open up, to be vulnerable.
Mhm.
There just seemed to be such so many layers of masking and protection, really, and they would often speak that out and kind of be like, I essentially, and this is not verbatim, but like I can't go there really. Like I don't know how, if I go there with you and it's out there, how do I go back into the environment? And Gabor Mate, who I'm sure you'll of course know Gabor Mate, talks a lot about this in prison work, that he'd work with male prisoners, and then the rates at which they would be attacked when they came out of therapy would be much higher. There's almost like they'd open up a little bit, loosen, and then be more vulnerable. So yeah, there was something about that. And then I was fortunate enough to work for quite a progressive charity, Football Beyond Borders, and I enjoyed a really great 6 years working with them when I came out of teaching, and was studying my masters alongside that.
Ah,
Where the people I worked with there were like, take them outside, kick a ball around. Like the school might say, how is this therapy or something, but get them in their bodies, get them moving. Don't just sit in a room with them and expect them to pour their hearts out to you. And
mm,
I started to see that when there was more movement involved, the chance to become more embodied, they would start to open up a little bit more, and often seemingly spontaneously just like share things with me I might have been working with them for 2 years, and then when I'd be outside with them when they were moving, they might say something. It could be a disclosure, it could be something very vulnerable and personal. And I kind of thought that, like, hang on a minute, Oscar, this is something's happening here, like unconsciously, physiologically. So that's the kind of roots of its inception, really, was combining sport and movement with talking, really.
yeah, there's something
Yeah.
about doing an activity that can make people feel that little bit less self-conscious about what they share with you, and also being alongside rather than face to face, head on, also makes a big difference,
Yes.
doesn't it? Yeah, yeah,
I'm thinking of Van der Kolk and the uh, "Body Keeps the Score" text.
yeah.
The kind of the trauma, yeah, the Dutch trauma. I think he's Dutch trauma informed practitioner guy, or I think maybe he's a psychiatrist. There's a lovely story he tells in there of somebody who's not a young person who's not responded to anybody in a psychiatric ward, and then he rolls a ball to them, and they roll the ball back, and it's
Hmm.
that first kind of reaching across the relational void into contact.
Yes.
I mean, that's obviously a more extreme clinical case, and that isn't what we exist to support people with, really. It's more kind of the masses, with young people, kids that don't meet CAM's threshold, who often won't receive any additional support, but
Yeah.
will be very quickly thrown out and excluded when they
Mhm.
continue to misbehave.
Yeah, well, the
Mm,
CAMS threshold is really high, isn't it? And it excludes a lot of
yeah,
people who could really do with some psychological
yeah,
support. So, would you
yeah,
like to describe what someone would experience when they first came, their first session with you? What would
yeah.
they expect?
Yeah, so it's a really helpful question, because I suppose that the segue I maybe omitted from the last explanation was how it went from football to boxing.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think that because I had boxed, I did amateur boxing when I was younger. I wasn't particularly good, Sue.
Uh-huh.
I've
Oh.
worked very, very hard, but it wasn't, after I had some bouts, I kind of thought, I love the training and I love knowing how to defend myself, but it's not really something I wanted to pursue competitively. But I kept up with the training, and then Mitch Cloak, who is an experienced fighter himself and coach, and one of my best friends, is a lovely guy. During lockdown, we would do these like one-to-one sessions together just to keep active, albeit sort of breaking the rules and the ridiculous rules in my opinion at the time. So
Uh-huh.
it's
Uh-huh.
ridiculous in some sense. Um, and yeah, again, it was the continuation of that same pattern I'd observed prior to that, where once we'd done this really intense boxing training, we'd then just really open up to each other in a way that I'd never done with any man before. You know, that I'd never really felt that comfortable to be as vulnerable as I was, and vice versa. And he said the same thing. So we
Wow.
said to ourselves, like, what if we could take this to other people and, you know, do it in a group? And, you know, I was coming to the, oh, I think I was in my second or third year of the masters at the time, and knew at that point, as I know now, that I'm much more I think I'm much more suited and certainly prefer group work to individual working. Just my own temperament, personality.
Mm,
I think
mm,
I'm better at it, I think, than I am at one-to-one work.
mm.
So I said, look, I'll do this group psychotherapy training. I'll finish it. You go and do your boxing training, carry on fighting. And then, yeah, we started delivering pilot projects last July, last summer.
Uh-huh.
And what people can expect, Sue, is very simple. Like, they come into the space. We do about an hour to an hour and 10 minutes of intensive boxing training for all levels and all ages.
Mhm.
So with children, it tends to be more done in year groups for, you know, safeguarding reasons, to make sure we're kind of following best practice in that area. With the men's group, if you're over 18, we have guys that are, I think, 19, 20 come to some of our men's group, right up until the oldest participant we have probably is mid to late 50s.
Ah,
There's no expectation for anybody to fight or to spar. People can do that if they want, as long as there's a level 2 England boxing coach present. This is like the law around this stuff.
right.
Um, and people go at their own pace. And then once we've done the boxing training, we literally just get a circle of chairs, put them in the middle of the boxing ring,
Ah,
uh, and talk, really. And I don't talk about it as psychotherapy, because, as you rightly alluded to at the start of this call, it's like, it's about making more accessible spaces. I don't say it's time for therapy hour kind of thing. It's more like
yeah.
that, you know, the way we start it, maybe it's somewhat of a Trojan horse, is to talk about the boxing session. So how was that for you? What did you
Yeah,
experience? What were the challenges you had? And then
lovely.
what's incredible, and we learned this from very early on in the pilot, is that there'll always be correlates and parallels with what guys experience in the ring
Mm,
and what they experience in their personal lives, relationships, professional lives outside of the ring. You know,
mm,
I'm conflict avoidant. I can't regulate myself. I lose my temper too quickly. You know, all these things that are so often, I think, taboo for men, and you know, or you know, relegated to the category of, you know, toxic masculinity or things like that, that
mm.
don't get a chance to be really explored. Boxing is so far from that, that it kind of creates more of a safe setting to, you know, explore your anger and your rage in a contained environment, and your fear. And actually, what we see more than anything is that there's so much fear and sadness and loneliness, actually, I would say, is the biggest one, the isolation that men experience.
Isolation. Mm.
Yeah. So I hope that I'm quite verbose. I talk at length about these things, and I'll probably let you get a word in, X-rays.
Well,
But that's what they
that
can expect.
it's lovely. It's lovely. You're very relational, Steph, and I know that would come across very strongly with the people that you work with, and
Thank
very,
you.
very accepting and non-judgmental and easy to be around. I can really see
Thanks.
how the young men open up to you. It's fantastic. So tell us a
Thank
bit
you.
about the funding, and I know that's been a struggle from the start, hasn't it?
It has. I mean, I won't, you know, just to stay professional, I won't name any funding bodies, but we
No.
we did have an interesting experience quite early on in our search for funds, which links to something you'd mentioned before, where an organisation had shown a lot of interest and actually reached out to us to fund us.
Hmm.
Very quickly came back in with, we're really keen to fund you, but we need you to do 40% of your work needs to be delivered to girls as well.
Uh-huh.
And we'd said, you know, we're not actually, we do work with some girls groups in the community centres we work in, purely because the main issue there is poverty
Uh,
in the kind of southeast London Peckham community we work in. So, you know, not wanting to in any way compound the problematic sort of identity politics climate that I constantly lambast. You know, I wasn't going to say, well, no, we don't work with girls on principle because this is about men's issues.
mhm.
However, we are, you know, we didn't want to get into mission drift, and we set up specifically to work with the men and boys you mentioned before, so at risk of developing serious, moderate to serious mental health problems, so at risk from taking their lives essentially. So
Mm.
we were we were quite early in our work, and we pushed back and said, we'd really like to stay working with men at the moment. Our whole evaluation impact structure is set up around monitoring how this impacts men,
Mhm.
and they pulled out at that point. So we lost what would have potentially been about £25,000, which would have been big for us at that time.
Mm.
And sometimes you have to stick to your principles, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we there's we've had some bits of funding come in. It's mainly been through the kindness of strangers, people that have donated to the crowdfunder, yourself included. Thank you very much. I really
You're so
appreciate it.
welcome. You're
Um,
so welcome.
but we're running it predominantly in a voluntary capacity, so it's a real strain. It's like we're all working full-time jobs. We run these sessions sometimes after school. We run them in the week. We run them on weeknights as well. And none of us are taking any money. We often say at the moment to ourselves, we get so much from it that it's justifiable at the moment, but
Hmm.
it certainly isn't scalable. So while we are kind of back to the drawing board with looking for more significant funding and enlisting the support of people who can help us access that,
Mm.
we are, essentially trying to raise funds
Mm.
to buy new equipment. I mean, like, boxing gloves tend to last a year and a half with constant use.
Mhm.
We're getting up to that
Mhm.
point. Venue hire. One of our centres, we can't really. I think I maybe mentioned this to you before. We can't really pay our hire fees for it at the moment, so we're not actually delivering in there, which is a shame. Uh, so yeah, we set up a second crowdfunder because the last one we did raised enough money to buy boxing rings and set us up for a 6-month delivery period. Again, no staff being paid, but
Mhm.
covering the venue hire fees, making sure
Mhm.
everybody had the right things they needed, and that's, I think, for now needs to be something we continue to push that funding drive. This kind of approach, really.
Uh-huh. That's incredible generosity, to not take payment. And I know that when you're working with mental health, I'm not familiar with working with sport, but it's not the easiest of cohorts to work with. It has its stressors, doesn't it?
Yeah,
So yeah,
sure.
so thank you so much for your contribution in that regard. Um, I hope anyone listening might feel inclined to donate to your crowdfunder. The work is of a really high standard, and I hope they get to watch the videos that I'll post with this, just to hear
Yeah,
from the participants, and also there's some parents I think commenting, aren't there, on the
yeah, yeah,
outcomes. Very pleased parents, very grateful parents. And
yeah.
if there are any funders out there, or anyone who knows of any funders, that would be a great way forward, wouldn't it, to get some regular funding? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
for sure. Yeah, yeah.
So
Thank you.
I just want to say something about your the phrase you use, gloves up, guard down, which are really
Yeah,
contradictory, but so well describe what you're
yeah.
offering. I love that, gloves up, guard
It's good,
down.
isn't it?
Yeah.
I didn't come up with it. It was actually my sister-in-law, so I have to give her a shout out on that. But it's clever. I
Wow.
like it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really good. So, is there anything more you'd like to say before we
Um,
say farewell to each other?
yeah, I suppose just maybe just on the gloves up, guard down thing. I think one of the hard things with running a project like this and really trying to stay true to your values, especially in this deeply polarized political climate, where I think there is a lot of, I don't want to get into it in too much. Nobody needs to hear my thoughts on it in any great detail. But is that we are unapologetically championing spaces for men to connect with each other physically, even when that
Mhm.
entails hitting and being hit.
Mhm.
And I think there is something about certainly with the young men I work with, when aggression can be harnessed and expressed in a contained, controlled environment,
Mhm.
aggression perhaps unsurprisingly tends to fall outside of those spaces.
Mhm.
This idea that in order for men to become enlightened or be the kind of men that the zeitgeist dictates or desires them to be at the moment, that they need to disown their aggression, I think is an extremely dangerous recipe for disaster, really. And
Mhm.
I think there's far more nuance than that. And we, what actually I feel quite emotional as I talk about it. So to be honest with you,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
when we, yeah, I do feel emotional talking about it. Like when we see guys being given, young men and older men alike, being given permission really to express their physicality and aggression in the
Mhm.
way that men will have done from time immemorial.
Mhm.
What then often happens is this incredible switch into something very vulnerable and soft and open. And it really makes me think of the Gestalt idea of the paradoxical theory of change. It's like, unless you can let people be how they aren't able to access anything else. And I think that's the kind of, yeah, and coming from a Gestalt training where I actually felt men were routinely, systematically demonized and scapegoated, it's lovely to be able to have taken what I learned there and use it, flip it for something positive. And I appreciate your
Yeah.
support for it as well.
Well, one of my areas of interest is rage. And I was going to use the same word, paradoxically. After an
Mm.
outburst of rage, there's a lot of dopamine release, which makes it quite addictive in a
Mm.
way. But
Ah.
this idea of channeling it, and
Mm.
then often men who or women who've had a rage will then reach out because they feel vulnerable afterwards. And,
Okay.
and there's that tiny little window of opportunity before it shuts again. And
Yeah.
so, from my perspective, your way of working is perfect. You get people to have their fight, have their discharge, have their dopamines,
Mm.
then they can use that immediately. Immediately, they can
Yes.
begin to share, vulnerably. It's harnessed and yeah,
Yeah.
fantastic. Really good. Thank you so much, Steph. I've really appreciated this
Oh,
conversation. I hope you raise
me
lots of
too.
money because I don't want you to just survive. I'd like to see you expanding,